we're gonna go ahead and get started. And Leah is pulling a presentation again. So we'll have that, but thank you all for being here for the ag meeting for the this meeting for the Milton SR16 corridor study, the first phase of that study anyway. My name is Austin Gray, project manager for this study, also assistant director of DELDOT planning. We have our consultant team here with us, and we will go forward with the slides.
Yeah, Andrew, you wanted to do introduction,
Yeah.
I think, before, is that okay,
Yeah,
before we jump into things?
Yep.
Yeah, so again, hi, Andrew Bang. I thought we could just go around and make sure we know who's in the room, but also who we have online. So why don't we start with in the room? We are using our OWL technology here. It does do a really good job of picking up everything, but try to project nonetheless, just so everyone online can hear us. So maybe we'll start over there.
My name is Dara Schumeyer, and I am on the Milton Tag group as a representative from Wagaman's West Shore.
Great, thank you.
Randy Meredith, I'm a councilwoman for the town of Milton and the chair of Streets and Sidewalks, and I'm on the TAG.
George Cardwell, tag member.
Bob Gray, member of the Council for Milton.
Dick Trask, chair of planning and zoning.
Johnny Hopkins, fire chief from Milton. John Collier, town of Milton.
And then how do we, if you could, come on,
Andrew, I would just call everyone out, so
Sure,
we don't
you could
have
do
to
that.
play the round robin, so I will do that. Top folks here are in the room. We also have Steve Baer from DELDOT. Steve, Darren W., Ben Griswitz, he's from our team at WRA, Steve Haar from our team at WRA. We have Harvey Derrick, or Derek Harvey?
Eric Harvey.
Derek Harvey, that's what I thought.
He's the chief of police.
Chief of Police, Paul Moser from DELDOT, and Tom is on as well. So I think that covers our online attendees, the staff, members of DELDOT, and representatives largely of other agencies.
So if you are on, online, we obviously would still love you to engage and be part of the meeting, so feel free and we'll try to recognize you when you see that you want to say something. As we do with every DELDOT meeting, we start off with a safety update. So, Austin's gonna do that. Are you controlling the slides, Leah?
I am.
Okay, great.
Great, thank you. Yes, every mission or every presentation starts with DELDOT's mission statement, which is to provide excellence in transportation for every trip, every mode, every dollar, and every one. We also start on the presentations off with the latest traffic fatality numbers. So as of today, we are at 20 fatalities for the year. So far, if you want to go to the next instrument. 20 fatalities for the year so far. The decline from this time last year, decline from this time 2 years ago as well, which is great. There's always more work to be done. The goal is 0, obviously, for all those numbers. We continue to monitor trends and look at those things as the year goes on, especially now as weather starts to warm up. This is when the crash rate starts to increase. So just be aware of those going forward. We're also including a new slide for most of you probably. This is a formal policy that the department has adopted. This is called the SAFE system approach. It's been in place with the US DOT for a few years now. And is kind of a more defining principle around how we approach safety in context of our projects. So you'll see around the side are some of the principles of the SAFE system approach, and then the objectives and the specific measures that we're looking at are the spokes in the middle. So safer people, safer vehicles, safer speeds, safer roads, and post crash care. Certainly if you want to go into detail about any of those, I'm happy to talk more about them. Those are kind of the aspects of how we approach projects and framing roadway projects specifically. We've got the agenda for the rest of the meeting up on the screen. I do want to also take a few seconds to just remind folks about planning studies and kind of their function and role in the process. Right, this is a planning level study. So the things we're talking about today are conceptual. Really conceptual, mostly feasibility studies, right? There's been no serious design engineering work done for lots of these things we're going to talk about. especially when we get to number 3, the alternative development. There's been no timeline set for any possible right-of-way acquisition, no timeline set for any possible construction. Most of our large capital projects in our project delivery process are on a usually about a 10-year timeline. And that's an average, right? Some things move sooner, some things move later, some things move through that process quicker, other things move through that process slower. So that's kind of an estimate of what to expect. I guess my point in saying this is that you will not see shovels in the ground for anything related to this project tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. These are long-term projects, but it takes a lot of public, support, visioning, collaboration early on so that we get a good product. And that's kind of what the goal of this group is to get that public feedback and really make sure that you all are advising us of what you want to see your community develop into and look like in the next 10, 15 years. So I think that's a helpful context for kind of how these studies work and where they fit into that project delivery process. Especially today as we talk about some of the alternative development, having that background I think will be helpful. Okay. So we are going to move into our set agenda, public feedback recap, preliminary modeling results, and then the alternatives development, public involvement, and then next steps. Certainly, if you have questions, feel free to ask about the presentation.
Yep, I'm good. As we bring up the meeting purpose, just building on what Austin said, I mean, yeah, we're not going to see anything, out of this for a little while, but these are the kind of processes that lead to the kind of changes that, a community wants to see, so it's a really important process. What happens now is what we will see, in several years' time. So, but in terms of this specific meeting, what do we want to get out of this meeting? We want to develop a shared understanding of how the DelDOT travel model is being used to inform this particular quarter study, the 16-quarter study. How travel model results will impact what we do for the study going forward in terms of next steps. Review potential alternatives for the quarter that were developed based on feedback from the November TAG meeting and December workshop, and obviously just the project team's analysis, and then discuss next steps. So we do have a lot to go through here, but we did want to start by just talking about what we heard or what feedback we received at the last workshop. So going to the next slide. Now, be right up front, we didn't hear from a lot of people, okay? So that is one thing that, a theme throughout this meeting is how can we get more people to engage in this process, to give us more feedback and so forth. So that's something we're looking to you all as TAG members to help us do. But, as we say, whether we get 200 responses or 5 responses, I always say all this does is reflect those people who took the time to fill out. And so we do want to share what we kind of heard in terms of the relationship to the quarter. So of the people we heard from, a couple people live along the quarter, 2 more visit the quarter, 1 works along the quarter.
Andrew, I want to interject
Yeah.
too. The attendance at the workshop was
Yeah.
good, right? We
Yeah.
had folks come through. I think you and Austin talked to.
Yeah. It's kind of, actually, I was surprised when Leah shared this with me because if you remember the way for those of you there, we had the workshop set up, kind of the active transportation on one side and 16 on the other side. And Austin and I were sort of on the 16 side. And we had a lot of people sort of funnel through. We had a lot of really good conversations. I guess it just didn't get to the next step with people, taking the time to write stuff down. But, it is what it is. So how do you currently get to destinations? Again, this is one where you could fill out any that apply. Everyone drove. 3 of them walk, 1 person bikes. Or at least one, there could be 1 person who does all 3 of those. And then I want to get to this because I think this is a little bit more. So do you encounter any issues traveling the corridor or accessing destinations along the corridor? I know it's hard to read. I'm going to read this, but there are dangerous intersections at SR 16 and SR 1, as well as 16 and Union Street and 16 and Mulberry Street. There are backups at Mulberry Street and Union Street all the time, but worse in the summer months. I live on Chestnut Street. Crossing over Route 16 at any of the above intersections is a challenge. The next comment was the intersection at 5 and 16 is a cluster. I'll let you fill in the next word. It didn't make it on here. There are many traffic issues there. With the additions of McDonald's, this is going to get worse. I travel that road daily to take my son to and from school. that intersection is a nightmare. When driving north on Mulberry to the intersection of 16, it is difficult to cross 16 or to make either a right or a left turn. When driving east on 16, left turns onto Union Street extended are a problem for either drivers wanting to make the turns or drivers wishing to go straight. When driving west, I'm nervous that drivers will make that left onto Union Street in front of me. It has happened. And then the new McDonald's would create a backlog of left turning vehicles driving east on 16 at the intersection with Union Street. A protected left turn for both east and westbound traffic is warranted, just like the new signals on north and southbound traffic on Union Street. So good, thoughtful comments there, and certainly helpful for us. I think we have a couple more here. So what is your vision for 16 in the future? Could there be a crosswalk overpass at 16 in Union Street that would allow people from town a safe path to the shopping center? There needs to be a traffic light at 16 in Mulberry. It is hard to see oncoming traffic, particularly when coming from town to cross over 16. I'm not certain how the new traffic flow at 16 and 1 will work. It is very confusing right now, although it is still under construction. 16 is not meant to be a pedestrian walkway, but a main thoroughway. And that's this person's feeling. That doesn't necessarily mean it's everyone's. The next comment, that the roads will be safer and the intersections be less congested. There are more and more housing developments and businesses popping up and making it more congested. And the final one, in terms of vision, light at Mulberry at 16, maybe with adaptive lights for Mulberry, left turn lane and light at Union and 16. And then
One more.
one more. Any additional feedback you may have that could assist us with this planning effort? Keep in mind all the tourists who cross 5 to get to 16 and cause the backups. Do the study mid-July, August, when the tourists are in town. I like the crosswalk at 16 in Union. I use it often to go to stores. I appreciate the sidewalk to the post office. So, these are the comments that we heard, and they reflect the people who made the comments. It doesn't mean that it reflects a consensus among everyone involved in the study. But we thought it was just helpful to share that. And again, we're gonna, come to you. We do plan to have another workshop, and we do want your help in getting more people out there, but also trying to get as many comments as we can get.
Just to quickly add to the workshop feedback, yes, as we talked about, we didn't get a whole lot written down, and we are always looking for new ways to expand our reach, and make sure that we're hearing representatives of the community and different perspectives, really. So certainly, we rely on you all to help us get that word out, and then we are, continually using new tools and resources to help us make sure that we're connecting with people that we want to hear from. So.
Any questions before we get into the modeling, or yeah, right?
So at the workshop, would it be helpful to have just some iPads that are already set up with the survey on it, so people would just fill it out over there? Because there were QR codes, but you put.
Yeah, we had paper surveys, and then, so we had paper versions of the survey that we could manually enter, so folks could sit down and do that. And then we had, if you wanted to do it on your phone, but you're correct, we could add the third, one of us could set up a laptop and have that ready to go with folks too, if some folks would prefer that.
Yeah, the challenge is where we're at in the study. It doesn't lend itself to like easy, multiple choice type questions. Like we need people to write their thoughts, so it does take that extra bit of effort, but.
You all monitor like Facebook and other social media sites, because that's where a lot of discussion happens on these issues. And if you're looking for discussion, people like to complain, and that's where they complain, so.
That's a good point. We do, through our, public engagement platform that we're using, there is a way to connect. For example, if the department posts about a study on its social media page, there's a way to connect that post with the study comments. We're still exploring how exactly that will work, and a lot of it has to do with just coordination with our community relations team. But that's a goal in the future, is to make sure that we get that kind of interaction.
Well, I say that because in my meetings at planning, that'll be at our meeting, at planning and zoning. You see a lot of discussion on Facebook, for instance, about what's going on in some of those meetings. But we rarely, if ever, have an audience in any of our meetings. So if you want to participate. If you don't, if you just want to complain, that's where it happens in having.
Yeah, and we received some of that in regards to this meeting even, like not noticing adequately, but obviously this meeting is public, it is posted publicly, it is on DelDOT's meeting calendar. However, the intent of this meeting is for members of the TAG to weigh in on what we are preparing for the general public, right? So obviously the folks, this presentation will be posted, a recording of this presentation will be posted, the maps we're gonna look at will be online, but they may change by the time we hold the actual public workshop next month, which we will blast as far and wide. We'll look to you all to maybe post it on whatever social media channels the town may leverage and all of that. But that really is the forum for the broader community to come to, because the hope is that, you know, there may be some things we show you today that aren't quite there yet and aren't ready and aren't painting the full picture that we want to take out to the general public. So it is an iterative process, it's staged, and like Austin said, we're not doing anything tomorrow, we're not doing anything next year. This is a long-term effort, there is no rush, and every step of the way. So say a project does come out of this, that project will have multiple opportunities, multiple workshops, multiple options to engage. And once we do get to those physical projects, we often do direct mailers to people who are fronting along, so that the intensity of that outreach increases as well. So, but to the point about online conversation, please forward that to us. I know as a not resident of the community here, I am not necessarily, I'm on Facebook, but I'm not seeing those conversations. So whether it's screenshots, copies, if there is useful dialogue or not useful dialogue that is happening, we're happy to take a look at that and factor it in. And also use it to help inform our strategy, to help combat some disinformation possibly, or do better at getting the word out in a way that makes folks feel a little bit more comfortable with what's happening.
And not to go on from too much of a tangent, but there is a nice spectrum of where public engagement really matters. And it's now, right? Once a project moves through the project delivery process and we're designing, you know, engineering specs and things like that, I mean, certainly there are, as Leah said, there are lots of opportunities for the public to still weigh in, but it's really hard when you have, you know, that level of detail gone into a project, time and money. It's really hard to make substantive and significant changes to something. So the time for serious public feedback and engagement and collaboration is at the planning stage, which is what we're doing right now.
So with that, we're going to get into a little bit of a conversation around what we call travel demand modeling, which we're going to explain a little bit in a moment, and how we plan on kind of keeping an eye on how traffic patterns and all of that are changing, and how that, and we'll tie that into how that relates to what we're doing here. So get to some of the comments we received, right? Andrew mentioned one person was like, 16 is a throughway. It's for through traffic. There shouldn't be, you know, we shouldn't be concerned about people traveling, walking, biking, doing these other things. It's for traffic. It's for motor vehicle traffic, let me be clear. Other folks, some in this room, some we talked to at the workshop, are much more like, well, you know, there's places to go shopping there. I live right across the street. Why should I have to get in my car to travel, you know, a tenth of a mile? Why does it feel unsafe to cross? So there is a conversation we need to have about the vision for this corridor, how we want this corridor to serve the community, how we want it to serve the regional network. So to that end, we can't just do that in a vacuum. We do work with data. Obviously, what we hear from the public matters, what we hear from you matters, but data is also a piece of that. In Delaware, it's kind of interesting because DelDOT controls a lot of the roads. Austin, you know the percentage right now. So 85% of the roadways in the state are controlled by DelDOT. That is not the case in a lot of other places. In Pennsylvania, PennDOT only controls state routes. Otherwise, it's under local township borough control. DelDOT's special. Gives us some extra challenges, I would say, because DelDOT controls the transportation piece, and municipalities like you, the county, control the land use piece. Now, when land use does not communicate well with transportation, we run into some problems, because there's kind of, you know, and historically it's resulted in the network we have now. You know, it works ostensibly, but with the increasing growth and pressures and that we are seeing, we see some issues, right? Because roads are being used differently over time, and how do we respond to that? So a big part of what we are trying to do is coordinate better with you, coordinate better with the county, coordinate better across the state, but especially this region, because Sussex County is growing so much, and this area in particular is growing so much. So we know the way development comes in, where it's located, is going to impact the roads and vice versa, but it is very hard to guess when and how that development is going to occur. Now, I know we can say we have X number, we'll get into how many, documented subdivisions. if you go back to 2008 and look at how many documented subdivisions were in place, it's, I think, more than now. And guess what happened to them all? None of them were built because the housing market fell apart, right? So we're in the situation where DelDOT can't build speculatively. We don't have enough dollars to just come out, build big roads everywhere. The resources aren't there, right? So we have to be very strategic about where and how those investments make. To that end, we put together this thing called a travel demand model. So there is a organization called the Delaware Population Consortium. It has representatives from agencies and governments from across the state. They meet and they try to guess, it is a guess, how much the state is going to grow, how many more people are coming. And they also project employment, right? And that is the core of this model. It's where people live and where they are going to work, where they are going to school. How are they going to be traveling? No one has a crystal ball. It's a guess.
I
Yes,
went very quickly over the name of that consortium. Could you repeat that?
Delaware Population Consortium.
Thank you.
Okay, so historically, that was the data that went into this model. DelDOT's model that says, okay, based on the consortium's guesses, they might get angry for me for saying guess, but you know, educated,
Used to like to say estimate.
estimate, they do like the word estimate. I like using plain language.
That's the word EPA used too for. it.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, George. So that gets plugged in to the model that looks at where cars are now, going now based on current population, and they grow that, right? So that helps show, you know, into the, it's called a Peninsula Travel Demand Model. DelDOT runs that. And then also we kind of break that down into local modules to help with studies like this. Now, but what if? Land use is changing rapidly. Places are growing faster than we think. The past 25 years have been kind of weird. You know, there's a lot of very unexpected things happening. The pandemic brought unexpected growth to the county and the beach area. So there's a lot going on that's harder to predict. Because all of those estimates, those educated guesses, are based on what's been observed in the past. That's what makes them educated. But when the trends are changing, that becomes much harder. So again, that land use data, so our forecasted land use data then supplies the demand. So we're assuming, okay, where is this growth going to happen? That's based on the current zoning that you all have for what can go where. If it's an agricultural parcel right now, we're not assuming a subdivision is going to go. So all of these things interrelate. So those population projections do look at peak summer, peak occupancy and employment. We did hear some comments about that. You need to be studying this in the summer. It's different in the summer. And you'll see momentarily, we do have different numbers for the summer. And we know growth, different places mean different trips. If a new school opens, people are driving a different road every day. A lot of people are driving a different road every day, especially because no one takes the bus anymore, it seems, which is weird. Yes.
I was just gonna speak to that. So when you can make an analogy between constructing roads and providing internet over copper versus, so if roads are like copper, multimodal and mass transit is more like fiber. It can expand much more or contract much more easily than road capacity for vehicle trips.
Yeah.
So, you know, one of the things that's always frustrated me about transit in general is that at least in Delaware, until maybe the last decade, there's been much more focus on building road infrastructure than there has been expanding mass transit infrastructure or putting more money into ways to actually move people that don't involve individual vehicle trips.
Yeah. Do we have Tramika on today, Austin?
She's not.
Okay, so Tramika joined us last time. She's with our
Yeah, I remember.
DPC. So, you know, and that's another, I'm glad you brought up transit, and you can see our little icons of people walking and biking and taking the bus, because that's another assumption the model has to make, right? How many of those trips are motor vehicle trips? How many of those trips are transit trips? How many of those trips are people walking or biking instead of driving? You know, kids who are walking, biking to school, every family, that's a car off the road. That's a good thing from a traffic management perspective, right? So it's balancing those needs, but then we have to pick a split, like,
Or you have to
is it
provide a
1%?
safe way for the,
And it's
an efficient way for
Yes.
them to not use their car.
Of course, yeah.
Because if you can't, you have to provide something that's attractive that makes people say, oh, I could do this instead.
And part of that is safety, and part of that is convenient,
Cost,
directness, time, all of that goes into it. And there's lots of other efforts. The DART Reimagined effort is kind of re-envisioning how transit works in places that are a little less dense. They're doing micro-transit pilots that are kind of on demand. It's in place up in Newcastle County right now. It works more like an Uber. There's just kind of buses, small vehicles out there in a loop. So we can provide more information about that. But really what the model is exceptionally concerned with, of course, is where are more cars going to go? What corridors are going to be over capacity? So, this little diagram down here, where are we at right now? Green, good; yellow, worse; red, bad. In 10 years, with more people on the road, which roads start feeling a little stress? 20 years, 30 years. So we are trying to use that crystal ball to figure out 20, 30 years from now, because again, these construction projects take a long time. If we say go today on widening a road, it's going to take quite some time to get there. So we need to kind of use this model to give us our best educated estimate as to what needs more. Okay, so now, right now there's just one forecast. There's one educated guess as to where things grow. And what we are beginning to do now is get a little bit more of a nuanced look at what happens if we continue on our current trajectory with more spread out growth, based on current zoning. What happens, and the county is in conversations about this right now. Andrew, could you remind me of the name of the working group the county was convened?
There's a that just started, the Sussex County Land Use Reform Working Group that the county council put together. There's 10 members, and it's really looking at a number of things, but really at the heart of kind of growth and how, where to grow, where not to grow, how to put in, different things. So the group is charged with coming up with recommendations to address those issues. So I think you can start to see some changes in terms of really trying to focus growth in municipalities and where there's already infrastructure. If you're familiar with the state strategies for spending from the Office of State Planning Coordination, they have their areas 1, 2, 3, and 4, trying to focus it in 1, 2s, and 3s and keep it out of 4s and so forth. So that working group's going on right now. Public also, you can listen in. You might see my face leading that meeting also.
So that gets into, DelDOT does not have jurisdiction on those land use decisions. The county does. The county is aware of this effort. They're working with DelDOT on these issues. There's a DelDOT representative on that group. So there are things going in tandem with this effort that we are plugged into and aware of. And this model that I'm telling you about now will also inform some of that as it develops. So, if there's more growth than the model thinks, our improvement we propose may not be enough. If there's less, it might be overkill, right? And what if the growth does manifest? The population consortium's numbers are right, but it's not where we think it's going to be. That obviously also is a huge difference. So, we are kind of beginning, technology has advanced our abilities to do some of these things, to look at some different scenarios. So instead of just keep going with the status quo, what happens if we have some other scenarios? So, because we can change things. There's land use changes we can make that working group may pursue. And there's also ways of working that DelDOT does this process, for example, working with the town, but saying you're going to do something, say we decide on the way 16 should look and work for Milton, may require other policies on the back end to support that vision. It's not just building it the way we think is appropriate. It may require incentivizing not using your car to get around. There's things we can talk about there. So, but we do hope that this model will support the work the county is doing. It will support the work the Office of State Planning Coordination is doing, and it will support all of these DelDOT studies. This 16 study is one of a few in Sussex County looking at these things, and that decision making will be made better than it may have been historically. So we're going to look at some maps. So this is Sussex County, obviously. You see our corridor highlighted in pink. Andrew just alluded to this. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar, but the Office of State Planning Coordination has investment zones 1 through 4. And you can see on the map, level 1 is mostly like incorporated areas. And that is where, again, the state would like to emphasize growth. It's where infrastructure exists. And that's not just transportation, that's water, sewer, that's all these things. And 4 is rural. And there's also off-limit areas. So you'll see kind of things that are grayed out, or the white areas, that are maybe rural zones. So there is a priority to keep open space open, especially wetland area, all these places that are not developable. So looking at this, our standard forecast, you see all these dots pop up. This is that Delaware Population Consortium growth. Every blue dot represents 15 households. Okay, and this is kind of the standard forecast. Now, if we do start looking at, okay, we do have a lot of documented developments that we suspect are coming. So we've highlighted some of them here. A couple right in your area, right? The Granary down here, right below to the west of town. Horwinds Farm. And then others down here on 9, some in Georgetown, some up towards Allendale. So there's a lot, we have more information than the Population Consortium gives us. So we can kind of make some assumptions that those, we're calling them key growth zones, right? So if we take that standard forecast and instead focus some of that growth in those growth zones. So that's moving our dots from just anywhere, from kind of a spread out, more sprawled up approach into those growth zones. So that is our adjusted forecast. So that is what the team is currently working on. Now our hope is that this is a little smarter than the standard forecast. Anyone have any questions about this? I know some of you are more familiar with this concept than others.
I have a question.
Yes.
We were faced with, in our group, we were faced with, growth pattern, recently, the maps. And the Del.Dot required us to get them to delete some of the growth areas. Because they didn't want it. But if you're talking, and we objected to that because if you're talking about timeframes of 10+ years, 10 or minus years in the process, who knows what happens 5 years from now? And if we take those areas out of the growth area, then they're not there for Del.Dot 5 years from now or 10 years from now to consider as far as growth is concerned. And that's a problem. That's a problem. You can focus these kind of ideas in more specific areas where growth is happening today. But what happens 5 or 10 years from now is a real problem to us because we have to think ahead, just like you do.
Yeah, so the maps we're not showing yet, because they're still under development, are some other scenarios, which I alluded to. One is for more compact growth, and one is for even more sprawling growth, so more spread out than this. Now, the point you just raised is why the comprehensive planning process is so important. It is why your future land use map is so important. It is why zoning and adhering to zoning is so critical, because all of this has to look back to those established, every zoning category allows X units per acre, you all know how that works, and hopefully folks online who are listening in, if you want to learn more about that, we can definitely kind of highlight that. But establishing that and adhering to it is important. Now, if you look, the Office of State Planning Coordination has a development trends dashboard online, and we can send the link around. If you look at the number of developments and growth that has happened in these level 4 areas that, the state has argued should be kept more rural, you'll see a lot of numbers. And that is reflective of the fact that growth is happening, and it's a function of the county's code. It's why the counties convene this working group in areas that are not, and it's harder to plan for, right? We have to have kind of a base understanding and assumptions about that zoning. So I think we're right in the midst of that dialogue. This study is not going to grapple with that. There are other processes underway that are grappling with that very issue. And I know Austin and Andrew, through his work with the county, can plug you into those processes because it is a big tangled problem.
Well, it's a mess because if we agree to deleting some of those areas out of our growth area, and then sooner or later, somebody wants to build in that area and be connected to the town of Milton through its annexation or whatever, then you're kind of screwed because the Del.Dot hasn't prepared a plan for supporting that particular area.
Thank you for that feedback.
I have a question.
Yes,
about,
Randy.
So it says, one dot is 15 households.
Mhm.
Does that get into the type of household?
So it gets into the density of households, so in the areas where it's, so whether not explicitly, but kind of implicitly. So when the density of the dots is closer, it's reflective of higher density neighborhoods. So it does not get into the level of like apartment building versus single family home. But it does reflect, you know, the units that we saw, the unit allocation.
But I'm mostly just wondering because a lot of people are retiring here.
Mhm.
So we have been.
Smaller
higher-
household sizes.
Yeah, smaller household sizes, but also that means that like 15, 20 years. The people who are living in those houses are not likely gonna be the same people, and so. Are those houses being inherited by their children, or are they being sold to similarly aged
Yeah.
people? And that, I mean, it really cascades into, I mean, do you
Yeah.
have to build more schools if it's just gonna be retirees and?
Yeah. Ben, are you on? I think you are, and you may be able to speak to this question too about the assumptions that we are able to make and the level of detail.
Yeah, sure. There's three different variables associated with households in the travel model. It's you could you could say population, which is the household size, right? And then and so we have population as well as how many workers are in the households, and then how many vehicles. So there are trends in the forecast, the way that they set it up so that aging is accounted for. And then, so if you have a over 65 population, which is the only segment of the population that is growing in recent years in Sussex County, you wind up with fewer commuters, fewer workers. And so those kinds of trips will be fewer in Sussex County than other places. So there's some sensitivity to that and acknowledgement of age and travel pattern.
Thank you.
Is there any effort to backcast? To make sure that the model actually is,
To kind of truth
can
it.
tell you what the past did? Because if you don't understand the past, going forward into the future is, as you like to say, a guess. I know typically it's, I mean, beyond a
Yeah,
calibration.
calibration problem. Ben, that's another one for you.
Which is just looking at today, but not looking how well the model showed what really occurred 5, 10, 15 years ago. Just curious whether or not to check or effort to do
It's
that.
done. Yeah, it's done in the field in general. I don't believe that the Delta model has done a backcasting, but I think that there is a serious calibration validation effort that's done to make sure that we replicate current conditions on roadways, et cetera, ridership, et cetera. So. Given the demographic information as inputs in that current year or the base year, you want the model to be able to generally replicate volumes and such on the roads.
And I guess at some point we'll get to employment, to the trip attraction as opposed to just a trip production.
Yeah, and then I know that is, because we kind of kept the map series straightforward here. We have like 50 maps. There's so many maps. So yeah, yes, that is a piece of it. So this is the origins of trips, right? So that is part A. And part B is destinations. And yes, that is there. We're not going to spend a ton of time on that today. I think employment centers are a little bit more stable in many ways than households. And Ben, if you have any more context you want to give there, please.
Just looking at those projects like North Star, for instance.
Some of them have.
Pool Spring, for instance.
Yep, multi.
Granary to a lesser
Mixed use.
extent. What they're gonna attract in trips is potentially more significant than what they're going to produce in trips. Just because of the size of the commercial components of these.
Mhm.
And at this point, it's all guesswork what that is, because it's just 400,000 square feet of commercial, with, Cool Spring.
Yeah.
Fine. What kind of commercial is that? Of course, obviously, that's where it really does get to be,
Yeah.
for lack of a better term, a shaky estimate.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing, there's trip generation manuals that our traffic
Yeah.
engineers use that I know you're well aware of that specify, a coffee shop's gonna do a different thing than a deli is gonna do a different, so all of that is extremely specific. So at this stage, we're at the very big picture of that, and Ben, I'll be quiet so you can give
Well,
a bit
and
more.
Lee, I think we wanna get through
Yep.
maybe a few more of these slides and then we'll see them all.
Maybe we just do this offline because
No, I
I've
wasn't
got a
saying
lot of
that.
questions about Del Dot models and how they
Yeah.
interact with. the
Yeah,
two-
we'd be happy to
Two
kind of
NPOs on either side.
talk some more.
I just know we have a lot more to get.
Yeah, so from here, actually, I'm gonna hand it over to Steve and we're actually gonna drill into the 16 corridor. So Ben, do you wanna speak to the employment piece real quick and then we can kind of put a pin in this? I'm sure this gave everyone a lot of food for thought. I know there's a lot of active conversations in the space now, and it may be that there's some other projects and processes that would be better suited for this, but Ben, please.
Yeah, just generally in principle, the way that we are moving employment with the different scenarios is somewhat based on if there's a strong relationship of employment location with household locations and the data that we have, then we have that move along with it. If it's not a strong relationship, maybe with households, it might be with other employment. So it'll move with, other concentrations of employment by sector, essentially, is where the relationship is set up. So we just change that in each scenario according to what that sector most is related to in other data we can glean from the scenario.
Thank you all for your
Okay.
great questions. One more,
question.
yes.
You mentioned earlier that the comprehensive plan process is important so that you can predict from a zoning point of view what's gonna be built, where it's going to be built and how it's going to be built. And I agree with that to a certain extent. But here recently, the zoning ideas for our comprehensive plan has been under pressure from efforts for affordable housing and ADUs, which has, pressuring us to be able to rezone some of those areas possibly to adapt to those new issues.
Yeah, to higher density. Yeah.
Yeah,
So and that will kind of get into that compact scenario I talked about, because there is some benefits there, right? And that's part of why we are supporting the development of the active transportation plan, right? Because if you have greater density in town, that could be a good thing. It could take cars off the road if those folks are electing to replace trips by foot or by bike. Now, if all of those folks are bringing 3 cars a household and parking on your streets and driving everywhere they want to go, then we have a problem. Now, I'm not saying everyone's going to walk or bike, and I'm not saying every destination folks need is within a convenient walk or bike ride. However, the more, I think your town is amazing in that you do have so many resources, so many schools, this library, a commercial center within what is achievable for walking and biking. So that's when we get into, again, not the study, supported policies of encouraging that behavior and incentivizing some of those things. And, there's examples from communities across the country who have successfully done that. But there, to your earlier point, it has to be attractive, it has to be safe, it has to save you money, all these things, So I think it's a much more nuanced conversation.
Yeah,
and we're in a housing crisis and affordable housing is immensely important.
and that pressure on us to be able to rezone for affordable housing, which we all agree with, has a transportation aspect of it, because if you're going to put more people in a particular area, then to avoid them using the cars that you're talking about, there needs to be a transportation plan to be able to move those people from one place to another, whether that's a bus or a modified Uber system or whatever. Then that needs to happen along with the more density.
Yes, yeah, and that compact model does make different assumptions about what's called the mode split. It assumes that the compact model, that more people will be electing to do trips. by walk or by bike. So again, but you're correct that you need supportive systems in place alongside those decisions. And that gets back to the whole collaboration between multiple agency partners at the local level, at the county level, at the state level to kind of come together and solve some of these complicated problems because again, lots of processes underway.
Now, it's easy to write a bill that says you can put an ADU in your house or in your backyard, and that'll solve the affordable housing problem. But that only is a very small aspect of this whole problem.
I know we need to move on, but I'll just say that the Delaware State Housing Authority just came out with their group's report on all that. And then this work group that I mentioned before also will be focusing on affordable housing and workforce housing. So more to come on that.
Is that gonna be a meeting type thing that we can,
Yeah, these are all public meetings that you can attend by Zoom if you want that, goes over each of these topics. And
we're talking about affordable housing right now and ADUs in our life group.
you should definitely take a look at the report that just came out from the Delaware
I
State
have,
Housing Authority.
we have.
All right, I'm gonna turn it over to my colleague Steve Harr, who is gonna bring us back to the very specific question at hand which is what's going on 16. Steve?
Yes, thank you. So yeah, a lot of good information discussed there. And taking a step back, I guess the plan with the high growth zones and identifying the developments is helpful to answer some of the questions that we've constantly dealt with in recent history of does this model predict, account for Cool Spring or the Granary? And it was always a tough to answer that because it was, yeah, in a way, like the growth in the county is there and it's targeted at areas of, that want to develop, but it was hard to say like, yes, we accounted for the proposed, 1,000 units in this specific development. So we're trying to move the model a little bit more towards confident answers in that regard. But unfortunately, right now, from the modeling standpoint, we're using still just the standard population consortium forecast, sort of again, we're talking standard forecast. We're moving into that next step of the adjusted forecast. But for now, I'm going to talk about trying to identify the priority locations along 16 and where issues may arise based on the standard forecast at intersections and movements and potentially some additional ideas of what we want to look for, study in the future, things we can do about them. So generally the forecasts have shown higher growth east of SR5 than west of SR5. And it's projecting higher growth on the crossroads like 5 and 30 than actually on 16 itself. So take that into account as we get into the next slides. And then as we talked about, the next step, hopefully before too long, will be to incorporate this adjusted forecast, which will move some of those, households, population centers into the known developments to see what happens on the roadways based on that change, and that'll be interesting. And then as also discussed, we're going to try to provide sort of a range of different land use scenarios and what that does to actual traffic numbers and capacities at intersections and sprawl and compact development scenarios. So if we move to the next slide. So looked at the three sort of major intersections in and near Milton along SR16, so starting at 30. And actually all the intersections we looked at have fairly significant planned improvements. So starting at 30, obviously there's a proposed roundabout. So we go from a sort of single lane all around signal to actually current proposal is to realign a little bit, set up a single lane roundabout. So we looked at the existing sort of level of service of the signal and the planned level of service of the roundabout. And you can see here in the summer traffic, weekday works pretty well. Concern is Saturday by 2050 may fail. However, I have some comments there on a summary slide that I guess one thing to call out is you see on the right side of the screen, the SR30 forecast annual growth is very high. SR16 growth around 1%, but SR30 growth between 2 and 4%. That's an annual growth rate. So that's some pretty significant growth. Now that's in line with, this area sort of west of Route 1 is obviously developing. There's a lot of already proposed developments and just general things that have gone on in the last few years. So it may not be ridiculous to assume growth rates that high, but because they're being applied to a already high summer Saturday count, which if you need to get too into the details here, but weekday counts northbound and southbound on 30 are 200 to 250, 273, but then the Saturday counts are closer to 400, 350 to 400 cars northbound and southbound. So growing those at the significant rate is what's causing our projected failure in 2050. So we also looked at off-season data that we had. Go to the next slide. So for all three intersections, we're looking at what we have for both the summer peak season, but also we want to understand what's going on, in the spring, fall, sort of the shoulder season or off season, because it's important for DelDOT to understand, is this going to, if we're projecting a problem, is it going to be a problem, more so than 12 Saturdays, 12 hours on a Saturday a year? Is it going to spill into more of the year, more of the peak periods in the weekday? So the good news here is, based on the 2024 May counts, projecting to 2050, we don't project any issues for now. So it's really just that summer Saturday. And if you go to the next slide, a quick summary of what we talked about here. The 30 projection obviously includes that planned single line roundabout, and it's under capacity in all analyzed peaks in 2050 except the summer Saturday. But as I alluded to, the summer Saturday volumes are already very high. We have high traffic counts. We've seen it here. We've seen it along Route 9 counts and studies on Route 9, and other analyses we've done. SR30 serves as a pretty significant bypass to SR1 and US 13 on those summer Saturdays as 113 fill up. People use that to get from Milford down all the way to some of the southern towns on 113. So that's why we're saying maybe the assumed high annual growth rates may not be as applicable to that specific peak traffic. So we want to get more data, see how the growth has been year to year from 2022 to 2025, and see what we're seeing in terms of how much that Saturday growth is occurring today to sort of inform the future, and then we'll obviously model the updated high TIS level growth household, moving them around, and then they sprawl and compact development, and see what they can tell us. But bigger picture, outstanding question is, what's sort of the community's goal and DelDOT's goal in how to handle this weekend bypass traffic on SR30. So leave that outstanding and move on to Mulberry Street.
Use an acronym, TIS, traffic impact statement. So for those who are tuning in, basically, when a private development is proposed, that developer is required to prepare their own impact statement based on their own proposed number of homes and square footage of commercial. Okay. You've been doing good, Steve. Not too many acronyms so far.
Yeah, I know. I threw that one in. I was mainly just referring to what we already talked about on those maps, the high impact growth zones. So at Mulberry Street, we are lacking a little bit of summer data, but we do have summer Saturday counts. The proposal here is to signalize. We understand and have observed and have gotten complaints and comments, and even within this public comments that you read out at the beginning, it's extremely hard to and potentially unsafe to make the crossing or left turn maneuver from either side of Mulberry Street. However, there is a project in design, hopefully that will head to construction fairly soon, to signalize this intersection. So that'll help out a lot and make things a bit safer, easier to cross. The volumes, thankfully, even on summer Saturday, are not extremely high, and the signal can handle them as designed into 2050 is the projection. You'll notice the growth rates are a little bit lower, projected here, just 1% at 16 and a little bit higher, but under 3% on Mulberry. So go to the off season, I think we have some more data. And again, we're still talking about level of service B and C with this signalized, even without additional left turn lanes or you know, side street left or right turn lanes. So all good news here. And I know that the signal coming in soon will help a lot of those complaints, alleviate a lot of those complaints. You can go to the next slide. That's okay. The one thing I did want to note here is that obviously those counts are based on the existing two-way stop control that is it's unsignalized. It's hard to make those movements, those through and left movements. So there's perhaps a demand restriction. People are using SR5 perhaps, or other alternate routes to avoid making those turns. So to grow that traffic from two-way stop control to into a signalized condition may not be perfectly accurate. So it'll be interesting to get further data once that signal's in. So we'll definitely want to get that. But overall projections right now.
I think we have a question.
Just a comment that part of the issue with that Mulberry intersection is that the speed limit on 16 does not decrease quickly enough after crossing Route 30 eastbound. It stays at, it only decreases to 35 right before that Mulberry intersection. And that makes, yeah, it makes it very difficult. I mean, even if we lowered that speed limit to 35 at 30, it would probably positively impact the ability to traverse that intersection if you were coming either direction on Mulberry.
Yeah, we actually
that's a really good note. Yeah.
We'll be talking a little bit more about speeds before we wrap
Does
up.
the signal design also include interconnecting with the improvements, the upgraded signal at 5 and 16?
Do they talk
Those intersections are pretty close together, so I mean, typically.
They are close together. I think that can come down to a decision after the signal goes online. I'm not positive if it's immediately going to be connected. I would think they would consider that certainly, but that can be changed and edited before and after install.
At the same time, and I mean.
And that's something I'm sure DelDOT will be tracking the performance of the corridor and do what they need to do to ensure that happens. It'll have the technology to do so.
That's
they'll both be connected to the system.
Yeah.
There's a Royal Farms going in on that corner also, which is going to contribute to the
Shall we advance to the next slide?
traffic on that.
Sure. Yeah, so talking about SR5, again, we have summer Saturday data. Maybe a lot of you might not believe the 18 seconds level, existing delay with level service B. We know there's struggles at times already, but what we are showing is that whatever it is today, it's pretty close to capacity, and even minor changes, even in the 10 to 15 year time frame, do send it to a failing level of service, even with the planned improvements that are associated, I believe, with the Royal Farms adding left turns to 16 and a right turn lane southbound. Part of it is because we're so restricted northbound with those properties right up against the intersection. No real significant improvements can be made northbound on SR5 without significantly impacting those properties. So they haven't been yet, but as we look at our options, what needs to be done in the future, that'll be some of the discussion there. We'll be getting again more data, 2025 data, off season and in the summer to fill out these tables and provide more updated sort of baseline data. So obviously this is a concern summer Saturday. It's likely a concern summer AM and PM. If you move to the next slide, the off season I believe shows even some similar concerns, not quite to the level of summer Saturday, but even on the weekday PM peak, by 2035, we're projecting, close, over LOSD, getting close to LOS F already, and then certainly by 2050, even the PM peak off season is going to be problematic. So continue the plan here. I guess you go to the next slide. We definitely want to continue monitoring the count data, see how things are moving year to year, at least every few years, get updated base data, because that's going to really inform, the growth rates are all applied to that base data, so that's really going to inform our projections if we want to be starting with good data, especially at something so close to capacity already. So yeah, as we talked about, there's limited right of way to expand the roadway to provide full lanes of additional capacity. The proposed improvements are great, I think, for safety wise and for getting people out of each other's way, blocking left turns, blocking each other, but overall doesn't provide like significant capacity and additions at the intersection to really push more and more traffic through. So improvements are great, but they're not going to like long-term, capacity fixes. Discussed were well before 2050 in multiple peak periods. There could be problems here, and even in the next 10 years, specifically for summer Saturday traffic. So this is definitely critical, the critical intersection, I think, on the corridor, which should surprise nobody. As I talked about, we want to get more traffic this year because we're either missing data, we have really old data, and then we want to start a sort of consistent monitoring, maybe not every year, but as this develops and as we form a plan, we'll every 2 or 3 years propose to get some more data. And then, obviously the next step, what we talked about with the new models, updated model runs, and then the land use scenarios. We're going to try to get better information on how close are we to these overcapacity conditions, and what do they look different in the compact versus sprawl scenarios, or is it kind of like the land use decisions don't have a huge impact on exactly when and where, say, SR5 goes over capacity and really needs more work. So at that location, over the next year, we're going to want to continue to consider alternatives to either divert demand from that location to keep it under capacity somehow, or figure out ways to increase capacity of that intersection to accommodate the traffic that's there and growing.
Does the model assume a shift of traffic from 5 back to Mulberry once the signal's installed in Mulberry? Yeah, I'm looking at northbound left out of 5.
Mm-hmm.
To go westbound on 16.
Mm-hmm.
Where is it going? I mean, if it's not, some of that traffic would typically be at Mulberry, but with the delay at Mulberry and there's no gaps. So a lot of it's gone over, especially now with the split phase, which makes a lot of sense. I'm glad they finally put that in. But my guess would be that some of that traffic will shift back to Mulberry.
And that's
that's
part of why we have this kind of continuous counts. So the summer and then also in future years to understand all of that.
In the meantime, when they're modeling this, since they're operating with some level of data now, so seemingly that you would have some level of corridor shift. Because when you look at that queue, the northbound queue approaching that intersection, I mean, that traffic is past Talbot. I mean, it's in an hour's time, there's no way that a split phase is going to operate and be able to satisfy that much traffic. So seemingly some of it's going to find its way back over the signal.
Which will also
Right.
mean that split phase will be needed at Mulberry too.
That's my guess as well.
Yeah.
Especially with the skew,
Mm-hmm.
the southbound approach is skewed enough that
Yep.
you need to just completely shut down the northbound approach to make the southbound approach safe.
Mm-hmm.
Especially as long as the gas station.
I believe Mulberry is being installed with split phasing. I'll double check that though.
Thank you.
So to your point about the shift from Union to Mulberry, we in the town will have to consider the fact that when people get backed up on Union, they're gonna start making left turns onto the side streets to get into Mulberry Street.
Yeah,
The town is blessed and cursed with a grid.
Yeah.
You know, it's a nice thing to have.
Grids are
Towards the
excellent.
traffic,
really.
unless you live on one of those streets and suddenly people say, okay.
Yeah, we have some.
Yes, I imagine in transition, there will be a lot of that. And then in future, once folks are accustomed to that and kind of, oh, it's this time of day, I'm not even gonna bother trying. I'm just gonna go over there. So that, yes, that's gonna change. People are gonna change their travel patterns. And you know, to what Steve shared, we will be monitoring that and that will be reflective in kind of future projections and these charts. So, yes, I think part of the effort today is to explain, this is not a, oh, we did the modeling and it's done. Or, oh, we did the counts and they're done. Like, this is a constant iterative process. And I hope one thing we've conveyed to you is that this work is happening. It will continue to happen and it will continue to inform the information we bring to you and kind of the recommendations we collaborate with you all on for this corridor. We're also doing work on 9, we're doing work on 24. Austin, I don't know if you have anything to
I
add.
was just gonna say, this work is also happening in connection with the Milton TID. That's under development right now as well. So, you know, we are meeting and making sure that those efforts are coordinated. So consistent data and that everything is, certainly our efforts are not, we wanna make sure our efforts are not, you know, duplicative of one another. So we are, you know, everything's talking to each other.
So, more to come.
When I moved here 14 years ago, there was a significant difference in traffic between off-season and on-season. Now, not so much.
Not so much, yeah,
So,
I agree.
Work from home.
Yeah.
Honest to God, I mean, the amount of traffic available on the roads today is far more even what used to be during the on-season kind of. So, and that's only because of the growth in that area.
Yeah, I'm glad you're using the Saturday traffic.
Yeah, and that will continue.
Yeah.
So it will, we have actually accounts scheduled for late spring, summer, and that will continue to be programmed to keep an eye on all of this. And again, that's part of the inputs into the model and all of these estimates that we're generating, so.
And although the traffic, using Saturday traffic is a good thing, but you have to keep in mind also that the people that are coming to the beach from the west, like DC and Maryland and so on, are coming on Thursdays and Fridays.
Yeah, so the weekend is growing.
There was a 9-mile backup last night at the Bay Bridge.
Oh, yeah.
Couldn't set up the counterflow.
Right.
The weather.
All right, well, so there's a lot we gave you to digest here. We're gonna be sending out these slides. So as you take a look through, if you are like, how do I read this diagram? Or what is this saying? Please reach out to us. We don't want this to be opaque, and that goes for your constituents, folks online. Like, we don't want, you know, it is what it is. You know, this is a technical, it's engineers work. It is technical, but we do hope that we can help explain how this works to the extent we're able to you all, as well as members of the public who are interested to kind of get into the weeds with some of this. But it is in all of our interests as, you know, government representatives, the state, DelDOT. I'm sure you all and the county feel the same way. Like, we do not want gridlock on our roads. That is not good for quality of life. It is not good for business. It is not good for many things. So we are all pulling in the same direction, and I hope folks acknowledge that. So with that, we're going to move into, thank you, Steve. Really appreciate you sharing your expertise. We are going to move into some ideas we have based on feedback we received from the conversations we had at the workshop, the surveys we got, as well as feedback you all have provided us. So one thing we have done, and Steve was kind of showing snippets of this in his slides, we have a printout on the table here. We'll have a PDF we will send you, is develop an anticipated future conditions map. So we know there's a lot of improvements that are pretty much guaranteed to come in the next couple of years that are outside of this process right now. So I think one thing, you know, Austin just said, what we're working on now won't show up next year. One thing that often happens is the developer goes out and starts building something and the public's like, DelDOT said they weren't going to do anything, and DelDOT's not doing anything, but the developer is, and that's been on the books for years. So we developed this map in an effort to kind of show what is, in our understanding, going to be done in the next couple of years as part of Del capital projects like that roundabout at 30, as well as the Royal Farms development, that if that storage facility at that corner goes in as well. So this roll map kind of shows that all those improvements that we anticipate as like near-term improvements that are happening. They are not being done as part of our study. They were already in the works and reflect the process that's been in place for a long time, where those developers do their traffic impact statements and they are required to build accommodation of that, what they're building. So this is small. In the spirit of time, I'm not going to zoom in to the whole corridor. So I can do that, and if we want to stay a little late, we can, but I know we are running tight on time. We will send this around, but essentially all of those blow-up shots that Steve has are incorporated. So the roundabout out here at 30 coming in, the self-storage development, the Royal Farms, obviously McDonald's improvements are done, Cypress Grove, all of that. So it shows the new roadway configuration, which includes those left turn lanes on 16 at 5, as well as the new left turn lane southbound. So the road is growing already without, just because in support of those developments. So hopefully that will help folks understand what to expect, help all of us kind of keep in mind what, is really the kind of more true existing condition than what is literally out there right now. So, and we also have put together some typical sections. Now, I just said the road's growing. So this section isn't true everywhere, but because in some parts of the road now, we are getting up to 3 lanes instead of 2. So this would include a left turn lane, maybe a right turn lane. But for the majority of the roadway, we are still looking at 2 travel lanes, 1 in each direction, and a pretty generous shoulder. And by and large, we have about 60 feet of right of way. So that is current DelDOT right of way. It includes the utility poles and a little bit of space outside of the pavement envelope. These lines move, they're not consistent everywhere you go, but that's how much space we have to work with. So, we have had some folks say, you need 4 lanes out there. Well, can we imagine where that extends to relative to private property lines? Okay, I don't think we need to show it on a map, but it would be extremely impactful to folks who own property along the road. Now, we also looked at, how could we improve things interim? So before we dig everything up and blow everything out, and some of our developer improvements reflect more of this, right? They're putting in that center turn lane, using some of that space. So instead of 10-foot shoulders, we make them smaller to create more space for a turn lane. Could even go a little bit more narrow with the travel lanes, drop from 11, 12 feet down to 10.5, create space for bike lanes. So this is something that could happen with a pavement and rehabilitation project sooner to kind of stitch together some of the developer improvements. But last time we met, back in November, we did talk about what would the ideal be, and that gets into accommodating other modes. So then we get looking at what could be done if we were to look at shared use paths. We are showing right now paths on both sides of the road. Now, is that necessary? Some may say, why? Well, we've been talking all day about how hard it is to cross the street, right? So if someone on a bike or walking is going to the post office and wants to travel east to whatever destination, maybe they're going, what's the cute restaurant out there, the diner-like thing. Say they want to go there. Forget the name of it. If we only had a pathway on the north side of 16, they have to cross that road, right? Now, it's hard for a car to cross the road. Hopefully it is not life-threatening, but if you're walking or biking or pushing a stroller, one thing you want to avoid doing more often is crossing roads. So by having a path on both sides, it ensures that people walking and biking do not have to make unnecessary road crossings, especially when the legal places to cross are few and far between, right? Folks are going to want to follow the shortest path. That's going to result in jaywalking. It's just not good. So but that gets back to our right-of-way issue, right? Because we're now looking at firstly moving those utility poles, potentially. That could, and also, one of these pathways is pretty far outside that line. So we're talking about impacts. Now, not as much impacts as adding 4 lanes of traffic and a sidewalk, but it still impacts. So these are kind of trade-offs. Now, the other alternative we looked at are what are called separated bike lanes. So, their interim improvement showed an on-road bike lane. That would be a pretty high stress, uncomfortable ride. I know I've been out there, I biked on 16. Randy, I think I dragged you with me once when we were doing some existing conditions work for the active transportation plan. Not fun, not safe, wouldn't let my kid do it. don't want to go there. So the separated bike path, this would be legally a one-way facility for bikes. So this would have bikes going in one direction and it would be adjacent to a sidewalk. So kind of similar to the pathway, we often observe that bikes do what's convenient. And a bike is not going to treat this like a one-way lane. They're going to ride it two ways, in which case we're back to just having a shared use path. But it is another option, and it's an option we're pursuing in some other parts of the state. It does keep those vulnerable road users, people who are not in a big metal cage protecting them, separated from cars by a curb and a grass buffer. So that safety, again, is a key priority of DelDOT, as we discussed at the beginning of the meeting.
You could take the share use path and merge it, which results in one. And paint lanes on that alternate use, one side for pedestrian and one side. for
Yeah,
bike.
and we do that in other
I think
communities
that's
we work in. Yeah, like a dotted yellow line,
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
indicating where, just to allocate space, because I know some people do this kind of thing down the middle of the pathway and they meander back and forth and you can't get around them. So yeah, that's an idea. And one thing we're also showing here is a really big buffer. So that's things like that buffer does not need to be 10 feet. There may be places it has to be. So this is all just one place in the corridor. This is what we call a typical section. Something like this would be very specific as it moves down the corridor, but just wanted to give some folks some things to think about that reflect your suggestion
And
last time.
Within the median, you probably would show some places where there would be pedestrian refuge.
Yeah. So in places where we would want to encourage more opportunities to cross the street, and that would probably be best served with a median crossing island. So in places where we want to establish outside of signals where people cross, yeah, this could be landscaped. And actually, we're going to look at some ideas for that. So a big part of this too is traffic calming. How do we slow people down? How do we indicate that you're in a different space now? You're not ripping down 16 out in the farmland. You need to expect people here, right? And to that end, and we have another roll map here. We talked about the transition zone concept. This is from the DelDOT Complete Streets Design Guide, which is how do we visually tell people you're not in this rural zone. You're not going 50, 60 anymore. You are coming into a place where you need to travel slower. And how can the road design begin to reflect that change, right? So we did take a look at the corridor as it works now, and we think with this roundabout, we have a really good opportunity, because you have to travel pretty slow coming into a roundabout. But that would be the beginning of lower speeds, as far west as 30. And then you can see this kind of red line, we coordinated it with that transition zone document. So your rural zone, and then you taper down to kind of your suburban zone. There's some tiny images here. I don't know how many of you ever go up to Centerville, up in the northern part of the state on 52, where there is very much, as you come into town, there's a landscaped median, there's a welcome to town sign, things tighten up, speed limit drops, all of these things. So there are things that can accomplish that traffic calming goal. It can tell people you're not on the highway anymore, and also that could be landscaped, etc.
That could be on the sign.
You're not on
The
the highway.
highway anymore.
Welcome to town. Slow down.
Or you
So-
start getting these curb and gutter.
Curb and gutter, yes. So going from what we call an open section, which is just the pavement is level, and curb and gutter, again, better stormwater management, also protective of people who are traveling outside of that curb line. And that friction also slows people down. It tightens up the space.
I play golf at Jonathan's Landing.
Mhm.
Up just south of Delaware or Dover. They have installed, they have to cross, get what the road name is. But anyway, they have to cross a road that has a fairly amount of traffic on it for golf carts to
Right.
get onto the golf course. So what they did is they built this, call it a speed bump, but it's
Traffic
really-
table.
Yeah.
It's
It's a traffic table, yeah.
And that allows the golf carts to go across, but they have signs on both sides for cars. Tell them that this thing is coming on and all kinds of arrows and stuff.
Yeah.
Not to say that people don't lose some of their the bottoms of their cars on.
Of course. Yeah, there's always those that.
But it seems to work, and it seems to work, it does slow people
Yeah.
down.
Yeah, so.
It does provide a way across.
Yeah, we also will be using DelDOT Traffic is in the process of revising their traffic calming guidance. I know some of you are more familiar with that than others. One challenge here is the classification of the roadway. You know, it is still a major arterial. So there are some things that are not going to be appropriate traffic calming treatments and others that will. So we will kind of bring some more of those options to you all to consider. And I would encourage you, as you're traveling within Delaware, outside of Delaware, Dara, I know you sent some examples from some of your journeys on the Eastern Shore. Please, okay, Centerville's an idea that we, a picture we're providing because we've done some work up that way. But if there are precedents you'd like us to include, we can even do a whole board at the workshop in May with some pictures from other places, because that obviously makes it a lot, firstly, it works somewhere else. If it isn't Delaware, folks might have driven the roadway, so there's less of an unknown, and it just allows folks to envision what could be. So that is where we at the time, 52. So that is kind of where we are at right now. We will be sending you high resolution versions of these PDFs to look at. They will go onto the website. You're welcome to kind of get up out of your seats once we wrap up the meeting and look at the hard copies. But I think since we are almost at time, unless there's any other questions, we can kind of talk next steps.
There's a good, when you put that traffic circle in on 30, that gives you an opportunity to cut the traffic speed on that road all the way into town.
Yep.
From 35 to maybe 25.
Yeah, I think it will probably be a step down, but yes, the first step down will be at the roundabout and from there. So we've not gone so far as to do a speed study yet, again, early, but just to know that we are thinking in these terms. This is DelDOT guidance at this point, is this kind of incremental approach of, again, I think the abstract, the more representational diagrams, easier to read, of making those changes. And there would be, the substantive speed reduction. That's not to say there's none before then, kind of before you hit the concentration of homes.
I personally think that the multi-use ways are more appropriate for this kind of a road as opposed to sidewalks. Because the multi-use ways can be both a sidewalk and a bicycle path.
Yeah.
Whereas a sidewalk just is for really.
Yeah, and then sometimes you have folks on wheel devices using them anyway, which can be a little unsafe because they're more narrow.
Right, exactly.
So.
So I think these multi-use paths are more appropriate for this kind of road. That's just me.
It's also me.
Huh?
It's also me.
Yeah, the only place we really, in communities where there are very high densities of people walking and biking, so think more like, not a town, more like a city, that's when we really try to get into separating the bikes from the people walking, because there can be more issues. But despite all the growth you're seeing, I don't think that's going to be the case out on 16. I think it should be levels that would be reasonably accommodated with a path.
My wife's sister lives in a development in South Carolina, just south of Charlotte. And it's a big development. They use these multi-use paths for their golf cart. Everybody's got a golf cart.
Mhm.
And that's what they use them for, rather than putting the
A
golf
lot of
cart
Florida
on the
retirement
road.
communities have standards for that too. I believe it is technically illegal in the state of Delaware at this point to operate a golf cart in such a fashion, but
A lot of those golf carts now are,
practically cars.
yeah, I mean, those things are flying. So
Yeah,
that's actually.
I know that, but even these multi-use paths
Mhm.
for the golf carts are connected to things like shopping centers and so.
All right, so as we move forward here, as I've said, this recording, and all of the PDFs of the slides, as well as these larger maps, will be posted online. I would imagine definitely before the end of the week. And once it's up and live, we'll be sure to send you all an email. I would encourage those of you who are participating in the social media dialogue to share them there as well, if you could. And we are working on scheduling a workshop for mid-May. I wish we were here with a date for you, but we are actively coordinating with the school district. And as soon as we receive word on that, we will also let you know. We will be bringing essentially posted board versions of what you've heard today. So if there were things you didn't hear that you wish you did, and or feedback on what we did share that will help refine what we presented for your constituents, please send us that feedback. And as we prep, we also would love to see you all at that meeting. So in addition to the SR16 corridor study, where we're obviously still very much in a visioning and data phase, we will be presenting the final recommendations for the Milton Active Transportation Plan, as well as the final draft report. So we've been working with the town. We are currently working on that draft, and that will be publicly posted the day of the workshop. And there will be a 30-day comment period on that before it is finalized, before the end of DelDOT's fiscal year on June 30th. So again, planning level study. Nothing written in stone about that. We have been getting a lot of good feedback and having some good dialogue with your neighbors, even done some on-site meetings. So we do need your help to make sure folks turn out, try and get those keyboard warriors into the room with us. If
It's
we can.
important for tag members to fill out the survey.
Yeah. Also, you all are constituents of this project and your feedback matters.
Continuously hear from.
You're members
not
of the
just-
public, just because you're a member of the tag, you're still members of the public.
Yeah, so we do suspect, in light of summer schedules, that this group will probably not convene again until the fall. So our next steps, we're doing the public workshop, we'll process the feedback, we'll distribute that, so you have something to ponder over your summer breaks. And we will be continuing with all that traffic analysis, capacity analysis, and then this group no longer will be handling the active transportation plans that will be finalized, and the sole focus will be on this corridor study. And we'll be in touch regarding a reconvening in the fall. But of course, just because we're not meeting until then doesn't mean we can't talk before then. So if there's interest in, you mentioned an interest in the model. If any of you, we could convene a small group or get more into some of that information. We are more than happy to do so. All right. Any other questions? And 11:58, lunchtime. All right. Thank you all. We're going to stop the recording and exit the virtual meeting. So thanks to those of you who sat in online.